Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to this very special event today. It's called Receive Ancestral Messages Using a Shamanic Approach, Communicate with the Spirit Realm to Release Inherited Imprints and Reclaim the Wisdom of Your Bloodline. My name is Stephen Dunnan. I'm the founder and president of the Shift Network. And one of the things I've noticed in creating and running the Shift Network is that there are themes that start to emerge, really come to the foreground in our collective transformation process. And one of those areas is working with ancestors in a more conscious way, in a way that helps us to heal inherited trauma, receive wisdom, and we're going to get to hear from one of the world experts today in how to do that in a way that aligns with indigenous ways of knowing and that also is informed by modern psychotherapy. So we're going to spend this hour with Dr. Stephen Farmer. He's a psychotherapist, shamanic practitioner. He's an author and also a songwriter, interestingly enough, and is going to take us on a journey that if you really like what you hear today, we're going to have a chance to go much deeper with him in a brand new course with Shift called A Shamanic Approach to Healing Ancestral Patterns. So we'll share more about that towards the end of the hour. So Dr. Farmer, welcome to today's program.
Thank you. Again, thanks, Stephen, for having me on the program.
Great. And I'll transition to Stephen as well here, but I wanted to honor your actual title there, Doctor, first.
You know what
So
I've done lately, Stephen, is called the tag Doc Stephen.
Doc Stephen. Okay, Doc Stephen. So let's dive in. And I always find it's useful to set a little context for your work by what propelled you in terms of personal passion or personal healing on this path of working with healing ancestral patterns.
Well, let's see, where should I start? I think I would start, very briefly. Psychotherapist for a number of years, very active practice, teaching at the local community college, etc. And then something was calling me, which was shamanism. And so I started investigating that. And my initial, I have a friend actually that is a shaman. I consider him to be a shaman. So I got to know him a bit and did some ceremonies with him, etc. But then I got on to when Michael Harner was still around, and he's ancestor now, speaking of ancestors, did a course along with Sandra, who I know has been, with the Shift Network, Sandra Ingerman. And I took a 2-day introductory course in shamanism, and I shot out of there like, this is it. I had a hunger for something different and more, that could offer different aspects and different ways of healing. I am a teacher and I'm a healer. That's sums it up right there. So the form that has taken over the years has shifted and changed to where the focus has become now synthesized or integrated with my training in psychotherapy, the various trainings I've had, and the training in shamanism and the practices of shamanism. But I'll tell you, just a more simpler answer to that is a dear friend of mine, Gretchen, who is also a shamanic practitioner, years ago said something that just really stuck with me. She was working with an African healer. Uh, I believe his name is P.H. Muchala. And she told me something he said that has stayed with me over the years. He said, I feel sad. You have lost your ancestors.
Hmm.
And I could feel a little bit of sadness even as I say that, because I think that's true in the larger Western culture, is the lack of attentiveness to what the ancestors have to offer, that they can be a vital and a living force in our lives, and that we can actively relate and communicate and be connected to the ancestors in various ways. And that one hit me really, for some reason, hit me really hard. And I felt like it hit me in a place where I felt like it was a calling, like a little bit of like, pay attention here. There's something important going on. So that over the years has developed to where I ended up, I wrote 4 books as a psychotherapist, and then I started working in shamanic practice. And so then I started writing some books related to that. Sacred ceremony, animal spirit guides, earth magic, etc. And the latest 2 that are relevant to what we're doing here is healing ancestral karma and then a revised version of that that shifted the focus a bit, which is healing ancestral family patterns,
Hmm.
recognizing that people would more easily relate to, let's say, the previous three generations than the fact that really our ancestry goes way, way back. Um, I could go on and say more about it, but I think that
Yeah. Well, it
that's
provides a great context, and I think that there is a sort of a severing of the contact with ancestors that is really not been a good thing necessarily for modern culture. So let's talk about how to restore that and open the lines of communication and understand the ways that ancestors are still present and available to be communicated with.
I'll share, Stephen, I'll share one thing with you, which is a practice that I've had for about, I think about 13 or 14 years. I've lost track. But rather than, as some people do, they'll open the morning, let's say, with meditation. Instead, I go to my computer, grab my cup of coffee for the morning, set it over here, and then I keep a journal. And in the journal, Stephen, there's two sections to the journal. One is, I put the date up, etc., and then I describe what's going on, just sort of like a diary in a way, or a real journal. But then I do something that I think probably a lot of folks can relate to, which is do some breathing and go into an altered state, a mild altered state. And what I am very well practiced at because of actually the connection to shamanism, and what I learned from shamanism, is I have certain beings, ordinarily non-visible beings, that will then step up to the plate and communicate something to me that I then transcribe. So I become a transcriber of what I receive from those beings. I think a lot of folks who attend to some of the programs can relate to that very readily, is that we can get information in other ways. And over time, like I said, probably 13, 14 years, I would say a few years ago, it became the ancestors. And I do say the in the plural, the ancestors. It may or may not be a particular identifiable one, and it doesn't matter because in a sense, it doesn't matter who's delivering what I need to hear. And the guidance, I, it makes me again a little emotional. The guidance has been just phenomenal. And I know in my heart of hearts, and I know from my experience, that ancestors, as we start working with them, yes, the first maybe three generations, we can make contact with them. People, many, many reports, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa have come to us, etc. But even goes deeper than that. When you think about where did we come from, we humans, with hands, fingers, etc., and this kind of self-reflective consciousness that we're fortunate to have. Um, we come from 4.5 billion years of a planet that evolved over that period of time to where I think it was roughly about 2.8 million years, I think, is when the life began to appear here. And then how did all that evolve to get to this point? Well, there we have a long lineage, much longer than just our previous three generations. But what I think it's important to do to initially is to focus on these in the previous three, maybe four generations, because these ancestors also carry the connection to a deeper ancestry. So my interest is, and what I've been called to do, because that's what this is to teach, to heal, to work with the ancestors, not just for my benefit. I'm a healer and I'm a teacher. I've known that that's been my whole life, really. Healing, giving my ailing mother comfort, being the youngest child, all that. So it goes way back, the thread of that. But what I want people to know from what I can share is the ancestors are a living force in our lives. And I want to land there. They are a living force. And my job, in a sense, and my calling, more accurately, is to show everyone how that can be, and to allow to ask people to be really open to that notion that you can stay connected to the ancestors. And there's various ways to do that. There's holidays we have, not just in this culture, but in certainly in indigenous cultures. And I'm sure, as you well know, and I'm sure most, if not all, your audience knows, is that the force of healing can come from many, many sources. But I think specifically when you begin to understand who the ancestors are and start to make conscious connection with them, then you recognize and you'll be aware of the effect that they can have on your life today.
Hmm. Can you outline for us some of the, like, I think we said in the script there would be four primary ways that you can make this bridge with ancestors.
Yeah, and there are ways to how would I put this? There are ways that we can perceive things differently when we're open to it. And that's all it takes is a willingness to give it a try. I sometimes say to people when, in workshops and such, don't believe me and don't disbelieve me. Try it out. Let's see what happens. I'm very in favor of that way of approaching things is be willing to experiment. Try this out, see what happens. If it benefits you, great, go for it. Very simple, the four ways. Visual, through my eyes, and that could be through the inner vision as well. So in or out, our hearing, auditory. And again, uh, a, a lot of my communication with ancestors is in that inner voice. And I've learned to distinguish when it's the inner voice versus the voice of the ego, the mind chatter. We all do that. That's just part of the deal being human. So visual, auditory, what I would call sensory, which means, or another term I've used is kinesthetic, but sensory is more direct, is that we get experiences in our body, feelings that are really messages that we can extrapolate their meaning once we identify it. We talk about that a lot, like what a gut feeling. Oh, my heart. I feel that in my heart. We speak that way and we put that into the language. And a fourth way is another one that we might best call cognitive. And the best way to describe that way of receiving messages is we know, but we don't know why we know or how we know. We get a thought, it pops into our head, and we don't really know necessarily even the source of what prompted that thought. And those are the four ways that we can not we can work with the ancestors, both of our previous three generations that come to us, but even beyond that, it's hard to really relate to the fact that yeah, we are related to the animals, in a very specific way, and that the world that has developed over 4.5 billion years, 2.8 billion years to be what scientists have determined is really the roots of life itself on this planet. That in a way, we're really related to all of this. And the most pertinent for our purpose really is in understanding that is to be able to communicate with human ancestors. But I will tell you, I take it that even the trees out the backyard here, if I listen closely and in a certain way, again, listening, hearing, that I can receive communications from the trees. This is stuff that in indigenous communities, if I were to say this to somebody who was raised in an indigenous community, and I'm generalizing here, they would say, well, of course the trees communicate. Of course the animals communicate. Not just animal communication, but spirit animal communication. Like I mentioned, that's one of my books, Animal Spirit Guides, how to receive those kind of messages from the animals. So back to your question, yeah, those are the four ways. It's real simple. What you see, what you hear, what you feel, and also thoughts that pop into your mind,
Yeah.
cognitive.
Yeah, it makes sense that all those gateways are available. How do
Yeah.
you differentiate between true ancestral guidance and your sort of everyday mind or projections?
I think it takes practice, Stephen. I think that's a question that does come up quite a bit is how do you differentiate that? One is there's with practice you develop a knowing, and that's the best way I could say it, a knowing that that communication is coming somewhere else. The languaging, when I do my transcribing that I described, I can tell when there's a distinction between what I would um, term mind chatter, the mind being busy. The mind has this way of intruding itself quite frequently into our conversations with spirits and spirit guides. But with some practice, you begin to understand the difference between the two. Uh, Spirit never tells you to do any harm. Spirit is always very instructive, kind, can be firm with us, uh, whatever ways that they communicate with us. Um, Spirit, and I'm using that term generally, spirit, ancestors, um, they want to help us. They've told me again and again, we're here for you, and we want to support your purpose here on the planet. Otherwise we're going through and we don't have a way to steer through a lot of the stuff, especially today, Stephen. And it's no brainer that the world has gotten even more complex. And as P.H. Muchala, who I quoted earlier, via Gretchen, we lost touch with the ancestors. And I'm on a mission, and I'm not the only one, but I'm on a mission to really encourage that contact with the ancestors, to be able to receive guidance from them. They may show up in a dream and say something that I remember when I wake up. When you go down to that road that you often go to, be sure to look to your right. I swear I've gotten specific messages like that. And I go down to that road, I look to my right, and there's an owl sitting in the tree. And then I go, thank you, ancestor. And I look at the owl and I go, is this an ancestor or is this um, an, a hint from an ancestor that says, listen to what the owl has to say? Not just the bird owl, but the spirit of the species owl. And again, that's a large part of my work with animal spirit guides. Is it's not just the animal becomes a messenger of sorts. So distinguishing, back to your question, distinguishing between the usual mind and that information that comes through. First off, I think it helps to meditate or some form of it, like I described with what I just call it journaling, but where I intentionally ask for anything that I need to know. And those guides that show up these days, especially in the last few years, have been ancestors. Now, I don't even know sometimes, Stephen, are they, is it my mom and dad? Is it my grandma and grandpa? And sometimes what happens, and I'm sure many people can relate to that, is mom does come through. I'll give you a for instance, my father, God bless him, he's come through on more than one occasion. He had, I don't want to say a whole lot about this, but in the family dynamics, he unfortunately was alcoholic. Sorry, Dad, but thanks for your help in letting me teach this too. He actually he died of his illness. He went into um, convulsions. They called DTs because he had pneumonia, went in the hospital, and then started going through convulsions because he wasn't drinking anymore, was withdrawn. Um, but he's come to me on many occasions. He's actually asked me for forgiveness.
Hmm.
And yeah, I'm real clear with my father. And there's an ancestor right there, a very specific ancestor that's only one generation away. And I know that he's also watching out for my two children, my now adult daughters, and now my grandchildren. I know that he's an active presence in their lives, and partly because And I'm not claiming it's because of this specifically, but I think something happens in the afterlife, the evolution that we go through in the afterlife as a soul, that we learn to make amends. We do come back. We make visitations to those that are still in the physical realm. I know that from my experience.
Mm.
Anyway, I say it.
That's a beautiful example with your father, and that we can establish that level of intimate reciprocity with their ancestors like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's not that difficult to do.
Hmm.
You know, it's like many, many things, Stephen, and you know this, I'm sure, is just we got to be open to it.
Hmm.
Like I said, what I share is I don't ask people to believe or disbelieve. Be open to it. Try it out. See what happens.
Yeah. Would you like to bring any of the emerging science around inherited trauma into this as well?
Absolutely. Um, I also want to make one more side comment, and then I want to come back to that if that's okay. And that's the festivals in various cultures, including our own. Halloween. It's based on the belief that there's a certain period in the year when the ancestors will come to visit us. And that's the substrata of the All Hallows Eve or Holy Evening when you take the word out. Let's see, back to your question one more time. I'm sorry, I wanted to put that in because it's so interesting to me that the little beings that show up in costumes and stuff at our front door, trick or treat, you know, the old Celtic tradition is that that's when the ancestors come, the darkest part of the year, come to visit, and we say prayers or we offer them treats or we show them that we care about them still. Um, Back to your question. I'm sorry, I lost the thread
About the
there.
science of inherited trauma.
Yes, yeah, that's really big. I was just reviewing some notes about it. There's a science called epigenetics that, according to my neighbor friend who's a scientist, we talked about this morning, isn't that old. It's about 30, 40 years old. Been around for a little while, but what it is that there's ways that the DNA is the way it is. You know, that does not change. You know, once you're handed a certain the DNA that you have, that I have, etc., the substance of that remains the same throughout our entire physical life. However, there's the way that the genes express themselves can be affected by various events. And one of the biggest is trauma. The two, actually three best examples is canaries that were, um, I believe it was a certain smell or scent that when they were introduced to it, the scent of, I believe it was cherry blossoms, there was a loud noise that was made. And so it, you know, it freaked them out. It frightened them, you know, naturally. But what happened is their, without being exposed to that sort of experience, their offspring developed the same reaction to the scent of cherry blossoms. Not only that, but their offsprings developed that same fear of that scent. So what changed for them was because of that experience, it was rather traumatic, you know, in what happened and how they were trained, is that the subsequent two generations each carried the same thing. The most, I'd say, the human and the most dramatic human experiences that have been cited for evidence for epigenetics. Epi just simply means above. Yes, it's genetics, but there's something that goes on in the way that the gene is expressed that may get shortened or abbreviated or changed in some way. And then it results in a change in behavior and physiology, etc. And the two most cited examples are the children of Holocaust survivors, and the children of those who were um, living through the Dutch famine of some years ago. The children of the Holocaust survivors that survived, obviously, exhibited the same kinds of behaviors and the same kind of feelings, the same kind of disposition, or I should say similar to what their parents had gone through in this horrific situation, with the Holocaust camps, and the whole situation there. So, yet they were not directly exposed to it. So, what epigenetics, dare I say, proves, but definitely shows, and I believe also proves, that this can be carried on when the genes are modified. Let's say if you were, or someone, I'll just use a general example, someone was tortured in some way and was tortured over a long period of time, it's no it's a no-brainer to know that that would change the individual. And so then if that individual goes on to have children, that those children may carry that same disposition that was ingrained by the traumatic experience. And so now, like the children of the survivors of the Dutch famine were grossly underweight. The ones that were born in the first generation of those that were directly involved in the Dutch famine. Not only that, but in the subsequent generation, in other words, two generations away, the same thing, that it was the children were inordinately underweight and malnourished, even though they had more available to them that they had picked up, and due to the genetic disposition that had to adjust in their parents, that was carried over into not DNA. The DNA was what it was, but the way that the genes expressed from the DNA. I think it's fascinating, and it suggests something very, very powerful. And that is that if you are traumatized, presently, I mean, in the present time, you are traumatized, and then you have children, unless you do some healing, which is widely available these days. I let me put it this way. I get it about trauma, and I've worked with people who've been traumatized, both shamanically as well as through other processes. And I think I really want to encourage people that have been, there's ways to heal this so that your children and your children's children do not have to suffer that same problem or the same symptoms that you would have. So I hope I'm not overstating it, but I think it's really, really important to recognize that this stuff can get passed along, not because it's your fault or somebody's fault or mom, dad's fault or something like that, but that it can easily be and readily be passed along. And epigenetics is the science that shows how it can be passed along. The genes become changed from what might be having someone that's parents who were relatively safe in the world, that weren't exposed to those kind of serious difficulties like a famine or living in a Holocaust camp, or that were parents that were severely traumatized from other means.
Great reflections. Well, I know you want to take us through a bit of an experiential that helps to ground the discussion around ancestral healing in direct experience. I think now would be a great time to do that. Do you want to guide us in that?
Yeah, and what I'd like to do, Stephen, I know we'll do a brief foray into that realm, but I want to introduce something that I would like people to carry away with them, once they hear this. And it's a way of calling. It's not the only way, but a way of calling in the ancestors. And then I want to take people through a guided experience. Here's the song, and I'm just going to sing it twice. I'll sing it once, and then I'll sing it a second time. And you can do this just as is, or you can do it with a drum, or you can do it with a rattle, but not necessary. It's a calling song, and your intention behind the song, it's very brief, is really what matters. So everybody take a deep breath. And here I'll give you the first round, and then if you want to join with me, as you hear this, please feel free to do so. Ancestors, ancestors, we are calling. Ancestors, ancestors, we are calling. Come, come, come. Ancestors, ancestors, we are calling. Ancestors, ancestors, we are calling. Come, come, come. Thank you. It's best done 4 times, but just for our purpose for today, 2 times. And it's a very simple chant that invites the ancestors to be with you. I can feel them right now. I can see in my mind's eye my father. He's been popping in and out here lately. I can feel something, someone behind me, and it feels like I would call an elder ancestor, someone from 2 or 3 generations ago. I don't have a clear identity, but I actually get a slight sense of a gentle hand on my right shoulder. It makes me emotional, to tell you the truth, Stephen. I feel so blessed and so grateful and so cared for in this way. And that's one of the advantages of the ancestors. So what I'd like you all to do, close your eyes, take a deep breath, nice and easy, and another. And notice as you do how your body relaxes. Shoulders relax, stomach, legs, as you exhale. And allow yourself to simply have the thought, I am safe and protected at all times. I am safe and protected at all times. I am safe and protected at all times. And as you continue to breathe and relax, just a nice, easy rhythm to your breath. Picture now 2 chairs in front of you, side by side. And it's not important that you see your mother and your father. For some of you who are listening, perhaps you did not know them. You were perhaps adopted. It doesn't matter if you see them visually right there or not. But notice the 2 chairs there and breathe and relax. What feelings does it conjure up for you to note their presence there? Good. And now behind them, there are 4 chairs, 2 on either side, behind those initial 2 chairs. And these are your grandparents on your mother's side, on your father's side. You may see them. You might just sense their presence as you breathe and relax. You might notice certain feelings that come up, sensations in your body, whether these 4 grandparents were known to you or not is really not important for our purpose. Again, that 4th item, cognitive. Know that they are there. And then just like a V that's going forth from your parents, then your grandparents. In the 3rd row, picture 8 chairs. And as you breathe and relax, notice that these are your great grandparents. You are the result. As Linda Hogan, Native American writer, has said, you are the result of thousands. And now here before you, as you breathe and relax, in the 1st row, your mother and father, perhaps still living, one or the other. or now in the afterlife. And on the second row, your grandparents, two on your mother's side, two on your father's side. And again, not important whether you knew them or not directly. Know that they're there. You make it a visual impression. Good. That's it. It's not a matter of trying, it's more a matter of allowing them to show up in whatever way you perceive them. And particularly when they do make themselves known to you, how it makes you feel. And in the third row, your great grandparents, shaped in now a V before you, 2 in the first, 4 in the second, 8 in the final row, which is as far as we need to go for our purpose. And now as you breathe and relax, a light of some sort shines on one of these particular ancestors. Could be the first row, your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents. It does not matter. That a beacon of light falls on one of these people in these 3 rows. And notice as the light falls on that particular ancestor, that gradually, gently, all of the others dissipate back into the afterlife with the knowledge on your part, knowing that you can make contact with them anytime you choose. For now, that one ancestor that was highlighted with all the other chairs, the other ancestors removed, now sits before you at a comfortable distance. And as he or she sits there, notice anything in the way of details as to how they look. Be aware especially of how you feel. Are you sad, happy, angry, sorrowful? Notice whatever you feel and be sure to simply allow the feelings. You don't need to do anything with the feelings. Just be aware of what you're feeling. Notice any sensations in your body as you focus in on this one ancestor that showed up. And the assumption is this ancestor showed up to give you a message. And here's what you do, is you simply in your mind ask the question, what message do you have for me? Thank you for that message. And once you've asked the question, notice what you see, what you hear, what you feel, and any thought that comes to mind. The messages will likely be very simple and straightforward. Take just a few moments to do so. Ask that question and pay attention to what you see, hear, feel, and think as you breathe and relax. Good. Very good. Very good. And now thank this ancestor profusely. Good. And if there's anything that you want to communicate with this ancestor before they dissipate back into spirit world, the afterlife, now is the opportunity to do so. And again, gratitude, gratitude, gratitude. Yeah, that's it. And release this ancestor now and allow your awareness to return to where you are, the chair you're sitting in. Good. And when you're ready, allow your eyes to open. And when you do, just look around the room a little bit so it familiarizes you and says to your awareness, oh, I'm here. I am alive. And I am truly blessed.
Mm.
Thank you, ancestors. Whew,
Mm.
that was sweet.
It was very sweet. Yeah, I
Um,
really connected with a release of scarcity, that I don't need to carry a scarcity around money forward. And yeah, I think so many of my ancestors really had a lot of tightness around that arena. So it's been up in my field to do more clearing of that.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. Thanks for sharing too, Stephen. Yeah, I came across it was a grandfather, Grandpa Mac actually, who stayed in front of me at that time. And it was just, and it really touches me. I get emotional just saying this, but it was just a reminder. He says, we're watching out for you. Simple,
Hmm.
straightforward. But when it came from him, being that he's in the afterlife, and also I knew he loved me. I just knew it. I think I was his favorite grandchild, to be quite honest about it. But regardless of that, thank you, Grandpa Mac, too, again. The fact that he just was reminding us that we're watching out for you.
Hmm.
Something simple like that. But in that kind of process that we just did, the impact was that much more powerful, kind of like what you described,
Hmm.
with the scarcity.
Yeah.
So um, this,
Simple messages from the right direction can be very healing because it's resolving those little karmic threads. And love for you to share a little bit more just about how that healing can unfold under over time and really build these kind of like a more harmonious flow with our ancestral wisdom.
well, again, my strong advice is I really like personally when I describe my journaling process. But I'm a writer, so that makes sense. But it may be just something as simple as sitting in prayer every morning, but with the intention of continuing and sustaining that relationship with the ancestors. They're there, they're available to you. It's just a matter of opening your mind, your heart, your body, your senses to experiencing their presence. And here's another pretty cool deal, I think. Once you start working with the ancestors, they will show you signs and messages in different ways. They will. Don't believe me or disbelieve me. You're going to hear me say that a lot, but don't believe, but try this out. Just ask for a message. Say, thank you, my ancestors. You can even be general about it. Thank you, my ancestors. There's a job offer that's in front of me, and I'm just not sure whether to take it or not. So I would really appreciate any counsel, any advice that you have. And then I would suggest do two things. One, sit, close your eyes, meditate, and just say, okay, anything that you are willing to show me, I thank you for that. And then again, what you see, what you hear, what you feel, and any thoughts that come to mind. And pay attention to what, any or all four of those different ways of perceiving, because spiritual information comes through like that. And if you have doubts about what you receive, you can always ask again. Another one that's a very, very powerful way is go for a walk and then pay attention to what or who shows up. There's a concept that I sometimes call the important stranger. I don't know if you've ever had this happen, Stephen, but you're kind of pondering something, for instance, like this. You just asked a question about a that job offer that's up for you you've asked the ancestors already. And you're walking down the street, let's say downtown, and you're going in one direction, there's a couple that passes you and you hear part of the conversation and you immediately go, whoa, wait a minute. Something of what he said stuck with me that I believe is at least a clue, if not the complete answer to my question. So that's another way. Another way is, again, one I favor, and particularly is animals. Partly because I think we relate to animals. I've got my dog here. He takes really good. We take good care of each other. Let's put it that way. Pardon me. But the premise for what are called animal spirit guides, which again our long ago ancestors, I'm talking about the elders, knew this. Indigenous people knew this. The world's alive, constantly giving us messages. And I know from my experience that a lot of those messages we can legitimately say are from the ancestors, whether the more immediate ones, like what we just did in the exercise, or the elders, what we could call the elders of the ancestor world. The ones that have been around for a while and have traversed back and forth, on the planet and remain connected to you even through the depth of the lineage, which may be several generations.
Hmm.
And they can send us messages and signals through various means, one of which is spirit animals. And a short teaching on that is when an animal shows up, whether in your dreams, imagination, or the physical animal of some sort, comes to you, you can actually, comes to you in an unusual way or repeatedly, you can actually receive a message. I'll give you a very short example. Raven is one of my main power animals or spirit animals. And I've got a little iron statue out front door of Raven. He's a great protector. Um, but the other day I was taking a walk with a friend and all of a sudden hear this, this rattling. I can't even do a good job of mimicking it. And I look and there's two ravens that are chattering to each other. So here's what I did, and this is what I suggest people do. Just stop, pause, take a deep breath. Raven spirit, not the birds. They are just like sales reps. I like to call them sales reps. What's the message you have from me? And then again, simple. Pay attention to what you see, hear, feel, and thoughts that come. The challenge I think many of us have because we've been indoctrinated otherwise is, oh, that's just make believe. No, but I got to tell you, Stephen, I've come to accept that imagination, not make believe, it's different. Imagination is the bridge. That's what takes us into this other reality that's right here, or has been called non-ordinary reality in shamanic work.
Hmm. Well, Stephen, it's just there's such a depth in everything you're sharing, and I appreciate the tenderness and sharing your own experience as well. And so I want to spend some time now talking about how people can really make this real in their lives with your upcoming course, since it's a really unique opportunity to build on all your decades of experience and the guidance you've given and taught to so many people, and really make this process of building bridges and healing and guidance from ancestors real. So we're really blessed that Stephen has agreed to teach this program. It's called the Shamanic Approach to Healing Ancestral Patterns. Collaborate with your lineages across time for guidance, liberation, and peace. You can find it at the URL healingwithancestorspirits.com, healingwithancestorspirits.com. It's a 7-week program. There are no prerequisites for this, and so you're really welcome to engage this exploration with a really seasoned guide who has such a depth and warmth about how to go about this. And so, Stephen, I'd love for you to share in your own words with your intentions for what people will come away with, and let's go through the modules and give them a preview of what's coming.
I'm getting excited just thinking about teaching this. So I want more and more people to tune into their ancestors. We need it these days. We really need it. So the first module is really a opening, getting acquainted with the ancestors. And it's real simple. It's just, I'm going to give you homework, creating an ancestral family tree from both sides of your parents. Again, some people go, well, what if I'm adopted and I don't know my parents? You can still do it. You might not know the name of that particular mother, father, etc., that was your biological parent, but you can still do this. Like what we've just done, who in that family tree, as you develop it, you start to build a relationship with the ancestors. And then you start to notice, who do you feel closest to in that lineage? Who do you feel a little bit like, oh, I'm not sure I want this one in my family tree here. But that we're going to go into that in considerable depth. We're going to definitely do a guided meditation, meet and greet the ancestors. That's a good start to start to build a platform of developing. And I do use that word very conscientiously, developing that relationship with the ancestors so that they become a living force. And again, we're in an unusual culture that I think just these last few years, people are becoming more interested in understanding what that influence is with the ancestors. We haven't had that. Then number two is the one we talked about, the epigenetics in the genes. And so we're going to explore that, make some discoveries about that, how these traits and characteristics that we may find are problematic, very likely have been inherited. The tendency, let's say, for a physical, my body is moving because I'm thinking, well, if you had a spinal injury of some sort, let's say 3 generations ago, somebody had that, and then you find you have problems with your back and with your spine, as a for instance. So that's the second module, and then three. I want you to be able to actually have an experience of what it's like to be in the skin, so to speak, uh, of that ancestor. What was it like for them? What kind of life did they have? I mentioned my father, like, what kind of life did he have? And the more I've explored that, mentally, the more I understand that asking questions, etc., getting to know him better, but more importantly, as he's come to me, for some reason, and I trust the reason, I don't have to know the reason, he's showing up quite a bit more. And I feel like he's here to sort of make up for some of the stuff that happened. Yeah. In fact, I don't just feel that way, Stephen. I know that. But that's what we want to do with the second segment is honor the ancestors. I want to teach how do you do an ancestral altar. Um, I moved here about a year and a half ago, and my two daughters and grandchildren showed up, and I asked them each to bring a piece, something to put on the altar. There's a representation, some gift that they have for their lineage, for the ancestors. So I want to show and teach people how to do that. And then to honoring the ancestors, a fourth module. We're going to talk about two different ceremonies and go into some detail about that. And once we do, I think you're going to have a different perspective on these ceremonies. And the one I mentioned earlier, Halloween, Holy Evening, considered by the Celts, for instance, to be that's the time when the veil is the thinnest. Here's the background of it. And that's when the ancestors come and visit you. Now, we've made them into sort of these scary, monstrous kind of, but that's not it at all. They come to visit you to say hi. And the way to honor them is the exchange, is to offer them treats. So that's why traditionally in the Celtic way of doing this, for instance, you set aside certain treats on the table so that when they come to visit, they're not in physical form. They can't eat the candy. They can't eat the donuts. They can't eat the cake. But what they do is they go, oh, be able to smell it and to take it in and to appreciate your gesture. So that's what the essence of Halloween is about. And then we go to module number 5. This is where it gets even more interesting, I would say, Stephen. Just I made some reference to that already, but how do you get messages? And a recap on what I've said about the ways that you perceive these messages. We're going to go into that in considerable depth because I want everyone who's participating in this to be able to see the world in a different way. I, I'm so clear on that, Stephen. I want using your imagination, not fantasy, make believe, not pretend, but imagination. I'm going to reframe that as the bridge to this alternate reality. But you can touch that alternate reality by noticing that that owl that just flew over your head might have a message for you, from the spirit represented by the physical owl. And then, staying attuned to the guidance that's offered and available to you at any and all times. And then module 6, that I've called intergenerational healing with the ancestors. Here's where some really very profound healing can take place. Through the development of this connection to your healing power in various ways, you're going to find a condition in yourself, and it could be emotional, mental, physical. It could be spiritual, but emotional, mental, physical, that you want healing for. And so I will guide you through some processes where first you find out what ancestor, like we talked about with epigenetics, most strongly carried that condition. Let's say it was a tendency to be, well, let's say the ancestor was traumatized at some point, and so they're still carrying that excessive, fear reaction to very minor things that don't need to be really scary. And you find that's in yourself, but you want to find the ancestor, and I'm going to help guide you that most strongly carried that condition. And then what you do with the help of the elders of the ancestor world, you send healing to that ancestor. And as you do so, then at some point, that ancestor will then now send the now healed condition back to you. Really, really powerful. And that's in the 6th one. And then, again, a little emotional about this. The next one, module 7, is healing the descendants. They're the ones that are going to be carrying on. Once we're past and we've gone through our life, and we've had these experiences and we've done our work in the world and we've followed our purpose, we've allowed ourselves to uh, listen closely and heed the guidance that we've received, no matter how it came in. Now, how can we benefit our descendants and their descendants and their descendants? We are going through, in case nobody's noticed, but we're going through some massive changes, globally. We're going through a lot of shifts and changes. A great title for what you've created here, Stephen, the Shift Network. Yes, absolutely. Major shifts, major shifts. And I want my children, my grandchildren, and great grandchildren, et cetera, to really be sturdy and ready and prepared for this. And it's not just by, let's say, sending them off to survival school. That can help, if that's something that's a gig that you'd like to give to your children, great. But it's more about the internal process and the awareness and the development of that spiritual knowing and connecting to the ancestors so that they remain to be they continue to be a living force for our descendants and that they can provide. And also, I'll put my hand up. I'm sure as heck gonna hang around, and do what I can to help steer them into the path of healing, the path of releasing, and the path of giving something back to the world. So I'm ready to go.
Well, it's clear how much this course means to you, and the sweetness and tenderness in talking about the potential is really very moving, and I think really speaks to that, it's not about like just all kinds of like crazy adventures. It's really about a deep, intimate healing process that can unfold. It's really like That's where the rubber meets the road. When we can release these ancestral traumas that have been carried for generations, when we can resolve patterns that have been held in our family lines for millennia, that is where we really leave a better legacy for our future. So thank you for that,
Well
and
stated.
really
Thank you.
your dedication to that. So we'll share a few more things about this beautiful course. It's called A Shamanic Approach to Healing Ancestral Patterns. Collaborate with your lineages across time for guidance, liberation, and peace. And it's all at healingwithancestorspirits.com. So in addition to this 7 90-minute live sessions with Stephen that you are going to get, which we've just heard described, and there's more detail on the page, you also get time to ask your questions. There'll be recordings for every session, both video and audio. There'll be word-for-word transcripts, weekly practices, a Facebook community to support you and deepen your experience, as well as small group time to connect with other participants. Stephen has also been very generous with a number of extra audio meditations. There's a healing through the generations audio meditation. There's a meditation for stress relief. And there's a special one you get just until midnight tonight, which is getting a message from an animal spirit guide. We've shared a little bit about that today and why that's such a powerful and ancient shamanic practice and complementary to the work with ancestors. Anything special you want to share about that meditation that folks get today about getting a message from the animal spirit guide?
Absolutely. Like you said, shamanic. That shamanism is a age-old tradition. It's followed, we can go back many generations and we'll find in even those of us in Western culture, we have ancestors way back. We lived with the land at one time, not on the land like these days. We lived with the land, and there's a shift in that. Living with the land also implies that you can receive messages from the beings, the various beings of the land. And I mentioned this before when I was talking about animals. Two ravens yesterday on the walk. And raven is a specific type of spirit animal for me, a real ally in my shamanic work in particularly, but in general, I know that I'm protected and I'm safe. I have an iron raven that's sitting right outside the front door, protection. And here's these two ravens, and I'm at, okay, what's the message? Because I'm always, when things show up, when an animal shows up in an unusual way and or repeatedly, whether in the physical realm or in imagination or in your dreams, it's something real big going on. And that's that they're like the sales rep for the spirit animal is one way I put it. And the two ravens, just to share that story briefly, it took me a bit because I had a friend with me. We were walking together, but I paused, and he's a total scientist. He thinks I'm a little loony, with some of the stuff that that I talk about. That's okay. I like what he has to say about other things. But they immediately reminded me, we're going to take good care of you. We are taking good care of you. Just a reassurance. That's animal spirit guides.
That's
And a
beautiful.
meditation will take you into a situation like that where you can get a message.
Beautiful. Well, it's such a blessing to have that. So that's your special bonus if you sign up by midnight tonight. And so it's clearly going to be such a profoundly healing and blessing of a program. And it's all very accessible in terms of the price. It's just 3 payments of $128, or you save 10% when you pay in full with one payment of $349. The course is going to start on July 24th and run Thursdays at 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern. But even if you can't make the live times, you can still get the full value with the recordings, the transcripts, and the community as well. So there's some great testimonials from graduates of Stephen's previous programs at Shift, and testimonials of people like Greg Braden, who loves his work. So you're in really good hands, and there's a lot of mastery that's come from those decades of experience and building on a psychotherapeutic background as well. So it's all available at healingwithancestorspirits.com, healingwithancestorspirits.com, and you'll get that special bonus with contacting Animal Spirit Guide when you sign up by midnight tonight. So, Stephen, it's been beautiful to be with you. Anything that's still on your heart for the people who are considering doing your full course with you?
I just think that's great. First off, I want to thank you, Stephen, for what you've done and what you've generated here. So, that you brought many of us into other into awareness, what I believe is really critical these days. And second is I want to thank everybody who does sign up for this course because I am like totally stoked. Remember that word? That's
Hmm.
when I lived back in California, surfers stoked. But I really am. I'm really excited about this because it's something that has just really become such an integral part of my life and a way of operating. And as a spiritual teacher, shamanic healer, shamanic teacher, psychotherapist, all the above, it just weaves itself into any of those systems in various ways. And also, I want to thank the ancestors. Thank you, ancestors, for all of your help. Thank you for your guidance, for all the people that are tuning in, and thank you for helping Stephen too with his leadership in this domain. Thank you. Thank you, ancestors.
Thank you. Well, the sincerity of that offering of gratitude really speaks so much to the heart of what you've been doing. So thank you, Stephen, for your work. Thank you for this hour, and thank you all for joining. And if you'd like to go further into this powerful, beautiful work, you can do so at healingwithancestorspirits.com, and you'll get that special animal spirit guidance when you sign up by midnight tonight. So thank you so much. Many blessings.
Thanks, Steve.